Monsters have been the face of our irrational fears and captured our imaginations since the beginning of civilization. Like our fears, they come in all shapes and sizes and meet us in our nightmares. They can be physical manifestations of evil, serve as metaphors that reflect our current anxieties, or they can be cautionary tales about the consequences of man's meddling with the natural order. Movies have been the perfect medium to explore the darker corners of our minds and help create the iconic representations that we will forever associate with these movie monsters. Following Dark Star in 1974, screenwriter Dan O'Bannon had an idea. A film that takes place on a spaceship with a crew literally trapped inside with an alien on board. After collaborating with fellow screenwriter Ronald Shusett, the pair finished a screenplay and titled it Star Beast. The pair sold the script to a little company named Brandywine. Enter relative newcomer and director of The Duelist, Ridley Scott. He'd never really considered doing sci-fi, but as with the heads of 20th Century Fox, he kind of warmed to the idea after seeing Star Wars. When he was tapped to direct it, he decided to change the all-male crew of the Nostromo to a male and female crew. Sigourney Weaver was cast as the iconic role of Ellen Ripley. Tom Skerritt as Dallas, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett, Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, the late John Hurt as Kane, and Ian Holm played an android named Ash. Ridley had his cast, now he just needed an alien. The final pieces of the puzzle were two artists who were responsible for the iconic look of this series. Sci-fi comic artist Mobius designed the spacesuits and certain elements of the ship, and the aliens were a product of the sexually perverse, biomechanically inspired work of the wonderful weirdo H.R. Geiger. The board is set and the pieces in motion, and Scott began to work on the arduous task of bringing the script to life. In Alien, a commercial freighter is en route back to the Earth when they receive a transmission from a nearby planet-like moon known as LV-426. They arrive to investigate and find an abandoned spacecraft known as the Derelict. The pilot of the ship is a massive deceased humanoid creature that looks to have exploded from the inside out. As the group is walking through this vessel, crew member Kane finds a chamber containing hundreds of eggs. One opens up, a facehugger flies out and latches to his face. The crew gets him back to the ship, and they try in vain to help. The facehugger lays an egg down the throat of the host, who in turn gives birth to a penis-like snake monster that transforms into the exoskeletal, acid-blooded, intensely phallic and hostile creature that would come to be known as the Xenomorph. The thing's basically a big angry dick, eager to fuck the entire crew to death. The movie exploits our inherent fears of being invaded by foreign bodies. Whether it's a spider sniz flying at your face to lay eggs down your throat, having a baby schlong birthed out of your chest, an android that bleeds jizz trying to stuff a phone book down your throat, the movie gets all up in your guts with disturbing, sexually aggressive images. Following the stroke of genius that Steven Spielberg literally stumbled into with 1975's Jaws, Scott decided to keep the monster hidden for most of the film's runtime, leaving it up to the viewer's imagination to build the suspense and unease. It isn't until the final scenes, when sole survivor Ellen Ripley has a showdown with the creature in the escape pod, that we get a good look at the thing. Easily one of the most iconic creature designs ever. After the fairly intense confrontation, Ripley blows it out a hatch into the vastness of space, where no one could hear it scream. Released in the US in 1979, Alien became a legitimate blockbuster, banking around $204 million off an $11 million budget. Not too shabby. Despite the success of Alien, it would be 4 years before the studio would decide to make a sequel. In 1983, following the success of Terminator, James Cameron began talks with 20th Century Fox and was hired to write and direct the follow-up, simply titled Aliens. Short, sweet, and you know what you're in for. Set 57 years after the ending of Alien, Ripley wakes up from cryosleep to find that LV-426 is being terraformed, but that the colony has lost contact. She's understandably a little uneasy about this revelation. Her employers at Weyland-Yutani are a little skeptical about her crazy alien story, but after a debriefing, Ripley is told to accompany a group of colonial Marines to figure out what's going on. Cameron brought with him 2 cast members featured in Terminator. Michael Biehn, who played Kyle Reese, plays Corporal Hicks, and the late Bill Paxton, who I think plays like Punk Number 1, plays Private Hudson. The man of many one-liners, including this gem.
Game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now? What are we gonna do?
Paul Reiser plays a corporate tool, and genre favorite Lance Henriksen plays Bishop, this film's android character. They arrive to find the entire colony is empty, save for a young girl named Newt, who seems to have been hiding in the ventilation shafts. Aliens took what worked about its predecessor and literally multiplies it. Cameron succeeded in making one of the best action movies in history, a movie that lots of people think is superior to the original, which is something he'd accomplish again with his Terminator follow-up. Aliens features more creatures, more action, and a climax that confirms Ellen Ripley is one bad bitch. Newt ends up being captured by the aliens, and Ripley refuses to leave without her. She gets suited up to go and save the little girl. In a horrifying shot during the final confrontation, audiences are introduced to the Queen, a nasty giant armored arachnoid that also happens to be a protective mother. Sort of like Ripley's become with Newt over the past couple of hours, or however long she knew her. When Ripley torches the egg chamber, Queenie doesn't seem to appreciate it. This leads to a rock'em sock'em finale where Ripley lays the smackdown on the giant cockroach with a freight loader mech suit.
Get away from her, you bitch!
Cameron's take on the series was less horror and more of a sci-fi action movie. It moved into themes of maternity, which I think are a little more accessible than rape. Ripley develops a motherly love for Newt, and then there's the Queen alien's fierce protectiveness over her hive. With a budget of $18 million and a box office of over $180 million, Aliens proved that the Xenomorph would be here to stay. Set sometime after the events of Aliens, Alien 3, or Cubed, was directed by the up-and-coming David Fincher. Ripley is once again the sole survivor of the previous film, this time because a crash landing leaves Newt and Hicks dead as fuck, enraging most die-hard fans of the series. She finds herself trapped on prison planet Fury 161, inside a gigantic prison hellscape that looks like Mustafar. The facility is inhabited only by XXX convicts, which I can only assume are worse than XX convicts. Alien 3 features bald Ripley, aka Ellen O'Connor. Remember Sinead O'Connor? Yeah, nobody talks about her anymore. Character actor Charles Dutton plays the Reverend, and Game of Thrones Charles Dance is Dr. Clements. It's revealed early that there are 2 facehuggers in this film. A queen is seen attached to the face of one of the crew members, but we don't know which of them. A pretty shocking autopsy on what's clearly a child reveals that Newt is not the father. The other latches onto a dog named Spike, or some sort of ox creature that they are farming on this planet, depending on which version of the movie you watch. But when it busts out, it's confirmation that, like the Xenomorph's name suggests, they emulate their hosts. Ripley and the criminals decide they've got no choice but to fight back, but they don't have the luxury of being loaded down with weapons like the Marines did because this prison planet has no weapons. When the aliens behave strangely to Ripley, she realizes that she's carrying a queen inside of her. After a pretty epic battle with the Xeno, a Weyland-Yutani ship shows up to rescue Ripley, but by now she knows better and flings herself into the same molten lava that's featured at the end of Terminator 2. The movie had seemingly moved into religious symbolism and messianic imagery. It's by far the goriest Alien film of the series at the time of its release, and its dark, dank, and grimy exterior has become a Fincher's signature motif. As I said, he's got a really impressive filmography, but his debut wasn't well received. There were some problems between the director and the studio executives, and it shows. I mean, there are different versions that completely tell the story in different ways. I personally enjoyed it when it was released, but it hasn't aged all that well. 5 years later, saw the last film to feature the iconic Alien title in Alien Resurrection. This was written by Joss Whedon and co-directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Danny Boyle. Can you imagine? This fourth installment had the biggest budget at $75 million, but it had the smallest comparative box office return at just $161 million. It takes place 200 years after the events of Alien 3 because, why not? The Xenomorph and Ripley have both been cloned using samples discovered at the Fury 161 facility. It stars Sigourney Weaver, Ron Perlman, Winona Ryder, Michael Wincott, Brad Dourif, and not even this stacked cast is enough to save this movie from its own weird tones and even weirder creative decisions that really messed up the story. When xenomorphs that are a product of the Queen clone escape their cell, Ripley and a team of mercenaries end up being the best defense against this ensuing takeover of the ship. It's not the best entry into the franchise. I think mostly because of so many different conflicting visions. Is it a sci-fi? Is it a horror? Comedy? I honestly couldn't tell you. And the Ripley xenomorph clone, the fleshy sex pit, and that stupid fucking clone baby at the end were enough to ruin it for me, but some people love it, and that's okay too. Nobody's perfect. Ripley was once upon a time a realistic badass, but now she's a sex-crazed superhero that spews out innuendos maybe meant to make her seem empowered, but really it just comes off as creepy.
Come on now, give me the ball.
Flawless victory.
Well, that pretty much wraps up this episode of Movie Monsters, where we are exploring xenomorphs and the Alien franchise. Stay tuned for part 2. It will be available here in about 2 weeks from the time of its release. I'm Jeremy. Be terrible.